it's just heartbreaking to watch. Like, these actors who are shoved into the spotlight in a massive way, used for the fact that they are a different race than white, and then pushed aside once they've gotten their spotlight and they've gotten the publicity they need.
So, welcome back to the pod. This is Walking the Fine Line podcast. I don't think I've actually said podcast in any of the episodes we filmed so far.
I don't think we have either. I honestly think that we just generally say pod. Let me turn off my fan real quick.
Oh, Emily.
You know, I've done worse things than forget to turn off a fan. Like, one time I ruined an entire take because I started laughing at the actor and I was standing next to the camera and I shook the camera when I laughed.
Good job.
And then our friend wanted to murder me. It was tons of fun. Back to the original story. This is a podcast. We don't say podcast, we say pod. I'm sorry for the confusion.
Yeah, lovely. Anyways, so one thing that we talk about a lot personally is just representation in entertainment. And obviously that's become a big conversation in the past few years. Last year, a lot of strides were made. Unfortunately, they were made because people were freaking out. You know?
Yeah, no.
Which is unfortunate.
It's a touchy topic, unfortunately.
Yeah. And it just kind of sucks that they weren't made just because they should have been made. But I digress.
We'll get to that.
But Emily even looked up charts.
Oh, yeah. I'm big on charts.
To talk about all the diversity that is not there.
It's getting better, okay. I promise. Like, it is getting better. That doesn't mean that there isn't still, like, this much space for improvement. Like, tons of space for improvement.
For audio listeners, Emily did a very, very wide arm thing.
Oh my god.
I don't know what that's called.
I explained myself. So, I said there's plenty of room for improvement. Anyways.
Yeah, but then you went, like, this much.
I know.
Okay. Would you like to read your charts? Because I can't read your charts.
Yeah, like, let's talk about the charts. So basically what happens is every year, I think it's UCLA does, I probably should have that in front of me if I'm going to talk about it, but I have the charts I want to reference. UCLA does a count of all the people working in the industry, of male versus female, the different ethnicities, like what you know, just like, I don't even know. Like, I'm talking and I don't know what I'm saying anymore. So let's move forward with the charts.
It's basically just a count of gender equality and racial equality in the film industry yearly.
Yeah, so the first thing I want to touch on is by gender, because gender is something I didn't want to reference as much, but I think it still needs to be talked about when we're talking about representation, because I would like to see more female-led films, just in general.
Wouldn't we all?
Yeah. Anyway, so I have this lovely chart. Milan's going to pop it up on the screen if you're over on our YouTube. If you're not, I recommend either popping over there or just Googling, like, UCLA representation and then lead actor,
you can
gender.
Always...
What?
Oh, yeah, but they can always watch our YouTube videos and stream us at the same time. Will we echo because it probably won't be perfectly in sync? Yeah, but I mean, that's fine.
Well, that's asking a lot. Anyway, so this is the lead actor by gender for theatrical and streaming films, and they have collected data. This is through 2020, kind of like censuses. It's always back a year, your taxes, it's always back a year. So this last year that they're presenting data for, we actually have the smallest difference between the number of male roles versus female roles that's ever existed, and I'm thrilled. It was 50.5% of all roles went to males and 47.8% all went to females. That is coming from where we started in 2011, which is our first data marker, where it was 74.4% were men and 25.6% of roles were for women. So we are closing the gap there. It's taking a very long time, and, like, I can't even tell you how disgusting the data would be if we went back, 10 or 15 years from there.
Woof. Awful.
But back to what we were talking about. We're talking about race and the equality there. So in 2020, last year, 58% of all roles went to a white or white passing actor that presents themselves as white. And I'm using terminology directly from the chart, so So 19.4% went to people that were Black, 5.7% went to Latinx, 6.5% went to Asian, 8.5% went to multi, so that would be anyone who presents themselves as not just one, right?
It would probably be ethnically ambiguous people.
Yeah. You know, I appreciate the fact that, like, we were getting more representation by using ethnically ambiguous people, but I also feel like that's a cop-out, too.
That's the worst type of representation. You don't know where they're
Exactly.
from. And half of them could play a white character and then turn around and play, like, a Middle Eastern character. And that just seems kind of inappropriate.
It really does.
You know?
Let me finish reading this chart. So 0.6%. 0.6%, well, not even a full percent, went to Native actors. And then we have the acronym MENA on here, which is Middle East and North Africa. That's right, I had to look it up. And 1.3% of all roles went to them, which is better than it used to be, but still not amazing, you know?
No.
So the next chart I have is lead actor by race for theatrical / streaming films. And this is another one of those where we're tracking it from 2011 to 2020. So in 2020, 60.3% of all roles went to white actors, and 39.7% went to minority actors, which minority in this case, they're grouping everyone who's not white.
Who is not white passing.
I appreciate them for doing these charts and getting this information and putting it together, and I think they're probably, if I remember correctly, they're sponsored by like a bunch of big companies in the industry to help pay for the studies. But I wish that they had a little bit more inclusive charts too. Because just grouping everyone by minority kind of sucks.
Yeah. Honestly, and also I think they need to be a little bit more specific, because the thing is that also when they're saying that they're using Native actors, right, or Latinx, a lot of them are having the issue with like what happened with In the Heights, not enough Afro-Latinos, or there's all those things.
I do want to point out one more number statistic on the chart before we're done with the charts. So on that chart that I was last talking about, that I said that currently last year it was 60.3% to white, and actually I think I misspoke. I think it's 39.7% went to minority actors. So if we look back 9 years before, let's flash back 10 years from right now to 2011, 89.5% of all actors in theatrical and streaming films were white. 89.5. And only 10.5 were minority actors.
It's just a struggle, and it's unfortunate. And I also want to say, I get that, like, there's a lot more that can be done, but I have this issue with kids who are teens now saying that they don't have anything, and then undermining truly the people who are older than them that literally had barely anything, because the streaming services weren't really there like that. So half of the stuff we were seeing were theatrical release. So 10% of a theatrical released film, which first of all, you don't even hear about half of them, were minorities groups, you know?
Well, and unfortunately, once streaming became more popular, you'll see a lot more of that representation happening in the streaming films that aren't going to theaters.
Yeah.
Big companies don't like taking the risk, which I think is stupid, because it's not even a risk. Like, if we're talking about the number of people who enjoy watching a movie that has someone who's not white in the lead role, there's a large number of people. There's so many people who aren't white in this world. And the companies say they don't want to take the risk, you know, and that's why so many of the number gap is closed, because they've been given more opportunity in streaming roles rather than in movies that are going straight to theater.
Yeah, and I saw this TikTok months ago where I don't even remember what the person that you can duet a video where you're next to them, or you can stitch it. For anybody who doesn't know, because I know a lot of people watching this don't use TikTok. Or you can stitch the video where it will have part of their clip and then it will cut and then it will have whatever you say. So somebody stitched this video, and I don't remember what they said, but the beginning part, this woman said the reason why people of color aren't cast as leading roles is because it's not believable for other people that they could be those people. It takes them out of the world. And I was like, one, you think that every person of color, like, can look at themselves in the role of that white person who is doing those things that other cultures would never be able to do or say? I'm sorry. I'm like, so what is your view of yourself as a white person? Are you just like the green screen for every other race? Is that how that works? That's how they're perceived. That's what they said, basically.
It just reminds me of, like, I don't know if you remember the kind of backlash that was happening back when Disney started, I mean, outside of, like, Mulan, and I'm pretty sure I'm forgetting some other princesses that weren't necessarily white, but, like, when they first released... Yeah, when they first released Princess and the Frog... There was all kinds of backlash online, and it was absolutely ridiculous. But at the same time, I was lucky enough to see so many parents talk about how thrilled their daughter was that there was a princess that looked just like them.
Yeah.
The fact that white parents, just generally so many people who are not a minority in this country, I'm using air quotes for everyone listening, a minority in this country, can be angry that companies and that the world is giving other people a chance to have characters look like them.
Yeah.
Like, it just reminds me of, like, when Black Panther came out. So much backlash, unfortunately, from the community. And then there was those instances of, like, the parents being like, my kid is so excited that there's a superhero that looks like him.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean?
And I'm like,
it breaks.
If you don't want to watch it, sure, but don't not watch it because there's a person of color in it. If you don't want to watch it, it should be because it doesn't look interesting to you. And period, if you like Marvel and superheroes, you're probably going to like those movies more than you would like some of the other ones. I mean, the way that I see Marvel people complain about whatever second, third movie of different superheroes, and then we'll talk absolute trash about any of the female-led or minority-led films without ever seeing them, blows my mind. I just don't get it.
The first thing that comes to mind is Captain Marvel.
Like
the absolute outcry of Marvel. And, like, I'm gonna generalize, but, like, typically the people I saw online complaining about it, whether I was on, like, Twitter or... you know, like, I don't even know. There was Reddit. There was a huge stream of people on Reddit complaining. Yes, I still read Reddit things. I'm sorry. And it was all a bunch of white men. And I was like, why are you all complaining that there's finally a female-led Marvel movie? Screw you.
Though, I do have to say this also, and this is not against all Marvel fans in any sense. I would never do that. But there's also this percentage, right, that have their guy, right, that they're obsessed with. To this level of, like, I will watch this actor and everything they do, even if it looks awful, type love.
Yeah.
And if they're not in a movie, the movie isn't as good to them. And if there's not a hot guy in it, then it's just not good at all. And I'm like, that's kind of, I don't really know how I feel about that. Kind of, I don't like it. But anyways, let's see. What were some other points specifically that you wanted to talk about, Emily?
I briefly mentioned it earlier, but part of the issue that I think there is in the industry, like I was saying earlier, is that so many bigger companies, so many companies who create what we call tentpole films, those are the ones that you're going to see making box office, like, huge numbers. They're usually films that come out during the summer. They're never... What I've noticed is they're never putting people of color. They're never putting any minority. Even into, like... They're even not going to put somebody who's, like, technically Caucasian, but not, like, the gentrified normal white person, air quotes again. Like, it doesn't matter. They're not going to put anyone who doesn't look like a normal white American. Sometimes English. They're okay with the English in a tentpole movie like that. They're never going to give those roles, those lead roles that they're trying to make their buck off of, their money for, the year. They're never going to put them in the tentpole films.
Of course, you have those few,
just makes it seem like they're not, I mean...
You have
there's been a few more recently.
Yeah, but then you have right in these blockbuster films, you have just those specific celebrities like Will Smith. You know, actually the Smiths as a whole, right? Or
yeah.
I don't know. You have Anthony Mackie, right? And you have Don Cheadle, and you have like Gina Rodriguez is super big now, and Zoe Saldana. Like you have specific people, but they're in everything. If you're thinking of a film that you have any black person in, off the top of your head, you can probably name 5 people that have been in like 30 films, you know, and they're in all the films with people of color. Or the same thing with
it's
any
like they
Hispanic
get tapped,
actor,
and like
right?
those people are always gonna get
it's like
picked. Like it's
Javier Bardem, Salma Hayek, Penelope Cruz,
yeah.
Antonio Banderas. You know, there's those people that they always go to, and they don't go beyond that. That's also a problem. You know, they're like, these are the only people who are good enough for a blockbuster film. Why?
They're like, yeah, like I guess we can trust them. The other thing I wanted to bring up is also that we have seen a trend, right, towards being more inclusive in our casting.
Yeah.
Which is, again, I love the attempts being made. However, I don't know if you've noticed. I know that quite a few people have noticed because I have seen things online about it, and there are some actors speaking up about it. They're casting them for the publicity of having people in the film.
Yeah. Well,
they're casting them for the publicity of using someone who's a person of color. So I love the GQ articles with all the actors, okay?
Yeah.
Like, I read the RPAT one, like, 3 times, no joke. I really enjoy, like, seeing a glimpse into their life, and I really love the way their writers write. But anyways, I was reading, and I was telling Milan about it the other day, I was reading one on John Boyega. And he was talking about how, he was cast in Star Wars. There was all this backlash, and Disney really publicized the crap out of the fact that there was a black stormtrooper. They did. I remember seeing him in, like, all the trailers.
Yeah.
I think that's why everyone threw such a fit, is because he was so involved in the trailers. But then, after that
Which there was no reason to throw a fit. He's an actor. He's a stormtrooper. Exactly.
But
oh, well.
I'm not getting into the politics of Star Wars. That's just dangerous.
I will. I don't mind.
But anyways, I wanted to read off something that he said, because, first of all, he's very well-spoken. I developed a little mini crush on him after reading this, just because I thought he was just such a cool person. I was like, Milan, I have to read you this. Milan, I have to tell you about him. She's like, yeah, I know who he is, Emily. Calm down. Okay, so he was quoted saying, "It's so difficult to maneuver. You get yourself involved in projects, and you're not necessarily going to like everything. But what I would say to Disney is do not bring out a black character and market them to be much more important in the franchise than they are, and then have them pushed to the side. It's not good. I'll say it straight up." And then he continues to say he acknowledges that some people might think he's crazy or that he's making it up, but that it was pretty apparent after the next film that that's exactly what Disney had done. And then he goes on to say, like, you guys know what to do with Daisy Ridley, you knew what to do with Adam Driver, you knew what to do with these other people, but when it came to Kelly Marie Tran, when it came to John Boyega, fuck all. So what do you want me to say? What they want you to say is, I enjoyed being a part of it, it was a great experience, blah, blah, blah. I'll take that deal when it's a great experience. They gave all the nuance to Adam Driver, all the nuance to Daisy Ridley. Let's be honest, Daisy knows this, Adam knows this, everybody knows. I'm not exposing anything.
Yeah. That drives me nuts, especially
it does.
With the last part. Too. Yeah, especially with the last part that he said, specifically, like, they know what to do with the characters. Yeah. This is what I was saying before, is that it feels like, which to a certain extent, right, they do have to include a certain amount of diversity. But with that diversity, they always do this weird thing with it where they're like, okay, well, I'm going to put the character in the storyline, but find anyway, whether this is gender related, sexuality related, race related, to use them for a little bit, but then kill them off, or if they don't need them, just like push them to the side. I've seen it time and time again. It's a big discussion online constantly about different characters from shows and movies. Mm-hmm. It's a big problem. Truly.
It really is, and it's truly, I've said it I said it earlier in the episode, like, it's just heartbreaking to watch. Like, these actors who are shoved into the spotlight in a massive way, used for the fact that they are a different race than white, and then pushed aside once they've gotten their spotlight and they've gotten the publicity they need. It reminds me, Milan was talking about it the other day, it reminds me of The Greatest Showman.
Yeah, no, that's actually, this was a very big problem for me personally, and it's actually a reason why I no longer watch interviews for films prior to their release. Because the entire marketing of that film, right, truly, Hugh Jackman's character is really the only important character in that film. If you've seen it, and Zac Efron's a little bit.
Yeah.
But you're watching them go on all these marketing campaigns for this film, and everything is about Zendaya and Zach's interracial relationship in this movie, talking about it in every freaking interview, going on and on and on about it. And I'm like, oh, that's actually really cool that they're going to do this and have this whole... I kid you not, the actual conflict that they talked about in their relationship was maybe a 1 to 2 minute part of like a 3-minute scene.
Yeah, I feel like them together,
and everything else about
like
their relationship, and everything else about their relationship specifically wasn't really an issue.
No.
Zendaya's character had a brother, and they were both black, obviously, and that was a problem within the storyline, but also not really. Why would you even bring it up if it's not important? I feel that way about a lot of the streaming shows that are coming out too. Mm-hmm. Some of them I get it, but some of them I don't. Like Ginny and Georgia. Within the first episode, it shows, her and her brother waiting at their car while their mom's in a gas station, and a police officer is staring at her like she's going to do something. And then they don't bring up race again in that show for who knows however many episodes. I haven't gotten that far until apparently there's this whole discussion that everybody found extremely awkward and uncomfortable between her Asian boyfriend and her. Mm-hmm. It's just like stuff like it's unnecessary. They'll market these things this way and then not follow through. If you're going to bring it up at all, then follow through, or just have the person in there and not make it a big deal.
I have a story to tell that relates to this. A story to tell.
Okay.
So I have this wonderful writer friend, and he is by far one of the most talented writers I have ever met. And he got the chance to work on this TV show that was staffed by black writers, and it was about a black woman. I'm not going to give much more information because I don't know if he's cool with me, like, talking about it. He was super excited, but he was thrilled that they'd given him this chance because he is, through and through, a white man. Like,
yes.
He walked into this writer's room as, like, an assistant, and he was, like, one of the only white people there. But anyways, I saw him at a party after he'd worked on this show, and I was chatting with him, and something else had come up in the news recently about representation. I'm sure there was some, like, blow up, like there always is, about some company screwing over some actor, because we've heard it a million times. But we were chatting about representation, and my heart was in the right place, but I grew up in a very white town. I grew up with white privilege. I grew up not understanding how important my role was as someone who's an ally.
And then Emily's camera battery died.
He called me out. So my friend called me out at a party. We were literally around a campfire. Like, this was not the time for me to, like, be upset. We were, like, drinking, like, partying. He calls me out, and he was like, because I was saying, I just think it's bullshit. I think that there needs to be more representation. I don't understand why it's that hard. Like, literally, like, the casting agents can recommend people, like, even if the writers aren't automatically assuming they need to include somebody who's not white, or, like, like, it's up to the directors and the casters. Like, the casters, oh my god, you think I know better by this. But, yeah, he called me out, he was like, wait a minute, hold up. He was like, you can't just throw somebody into a role that wasn't written for a person of color. Period. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, what the hell does it matter? Like, we just need more representation. And he was like, Emily, and this stuck with me, like, because I have it written down on my sheet of things that I wanted to bring up, because he said, representation for the sake of representation is absolute bullshit. And I was like, excuse me? And he was like, it is completely inappropriate to put somebody into a role that was written for a white person who was not white, because that character will not look, act, or present the same. They've had different life struggles, they've gone through all kinds of different things that a white person could never understand. So no, we can't just put people of color into a role written for a white person just because. And he, like, got angry at me, and I was, like, really defensive, because obviously nobody likes being called out, period. Like, nobody enjoys being called out. But he was right, and, like, it really stuck with me, and it really made me question, like, whose responsibility is it to make sure that we have more representation in this industry?
Yeah, I will say this, though, and this is from the perspective of the minority that has inserted themselves into this conversation that you two had. I agree with that to a certain extent, but there's also when you're, and this is kind of where I go, like, you can adjust things in a script slightly to make them fit for a character if race is mentioned and it's not really important to the story at all, right?
It
like,
could,
if they're like,
yeah.
oh, the short white guy or whatever, like, you can change that to the short black guy, just easily. It doesn't matter when it's in that context. But my thing is, personally, is I'm sick and tired of watching things where every single second of the story is just somebody's struggles. Like, why can't we watch a movie or a TV show where there are people of color just existing? Because that is the case. People of color do also exist in normal life. Yes, the way we go about things is different, and that's easy to adjust in a script.
Yeah.
But it doesn't always need to be this, like, deep-ass, because I'm a black person, blah, blah, blah. We have fun, too, you know?
Yeah.
There's no in-between for people that write stories. So when I see ones where they're just living, like, the biggest example I could give, honestly, off the top of my head, is Euphoria.
I really enjoyed that one.
You know?
Yeah.
And, like, there are things, right, related to each individual family, but it's not overpowering the rest of the story of teens and their debauchery, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
I think
it's not, it doesn't always need to be like that.
No, it doesn't. But I think the point he was trying to make, and the point that I have shouted so many times now to as many people that will listen as I can, is that it really boils down to getting writers in the room that are women, that are people of color, that have different experiences, that are young, that are willing to look at what everybody is at a surface level rather than what they are just because of their race.
Exactly.
Or their gender.
And I think that's important for everything, honestly. If you haven't experienced that thing, and it's a simple thing, if you've never been bullied before, maybe ask somebody who has been bullied before their opinion, you know? And that can go for so many things. But then along with that, right, if they finally get to the point of writing characters and casting these characters, cast them correctly.
Yeah. I think,
you know,
I think that's a big one, too.
And I can understand, you know, like, and some people disagree with this, but I can understand, like, a gay actor playing a straight character, or vice versa. But there's a difference when it goes into, if you have all of these transgender women in the industry, and then you cast a cisgendered man, what's why? If that's not what the character calls for, if you have the option, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or for example, right, we talked about this last week when we were doing Twilight. I talked about one of the Pej who was in Bones, and he played Aristu, who was an Iranian man in the show, and he's Iranian in real life. But then if you look at all the characters he's played an Indian guy. He's played, you know, a Arab guy, right? It's not the same. And why do you need to do that instead of just giving somebody the role that actually is that?
Yeah, and if I hear one more person say that those actors don't exist, if they tell me, like, they do, because so many people will speak, especially if it's someone who is unwilling to look at, like, their role in the problem, they will say things like, well, if nobody exists that has enough talent, or nobody exists that has enough experience to pull this role, Or, you know, they just don't exist in the industry. There's not that many people who are this specific race, this specific gender, this specific sexuality.
Look for more people to add to the industry that fit those roles.
There are plenty.
There's so many talented people.
So many actors.
Yeah.
That aren't necessarily known yet that could play those roles. Only because people are unwilling to cast an unknown, and we circle right back around to the industry being unwilling to take a risk, air quotes there, risk, on somebody. And I think that's absolute baloney, because the number of times that we've seen a movie with somebody who's relatively unknown, even completely unknown, and it has skyrocketed because they actually searched for someone with the right talent, for someone with the right look, the right race, the right, like, just whatever, like, the right part for the role. Like, if they took more time and were willing to take a couple more risks, I think that the industry would go much further, and they would actually see more success than they're even currently seeing. But there's the risk factor, and they're just scared, which is sad. It's sad. It's just what it is.
It is very sad.
It's a very deep It's a very deep conversation we're having. It really does bother me on a lot of levels.
And I do want to get into the conversation really quick, that in relation to this, where a lot of people, as well as some actors, have expressed that, well, as an actor, you should be able to play every role. And I can understand that to a certain degree.
Mm-hmm. I mean, they are acting.
But when it comes to, but when it comes to somebody, in the case of, this is written for a black person, a white person cannot understand that struggle. This is written for an Asian person. Maybe don't cast white people to play Asian characters. Old school Hollywood, you know, like. It's just things like that. I'm sorry, you can't. The amount of times that there have been Native roles, Asian roles, whether that's, you know, Pacific Island related, or to, you know, the Americas, it's just, I don't understand why they're like, well, this white actor's eyes look kind of, you know, and their cheekbones look maybe Native, so they're fine. Do you know how many Hawaiian actors they could have chosen for Aloha? You know, it's just, I don't understand that. It doesn't make any sense in that. And I get why people are like, well, but actors should be able to do anything. But there's a degree to that, right?
Yeah.
There would be things that if another race did to white people, they would also be offended. So it can't be one way and not the other. A black person should be able to play a white character if you want to play an Asian character and you are white. You know? But that's not how it works.
I don't even know what to say anymore about it. Like, I've had this conversation with so many people for so many years that I honestly just get overwhelmed. Like, the lack of, it's not even like a lack of understanding, it's just generally a lack of respect for everybody in the world. Like, if everybody could just respect where everyone's coming from, the communication on the subject would be a lot clearer, and there'd be a lot more understanding going on.
Yeah, and not everybody's always going to agree, but at least trying to hear people out is important. And especially it's important coming from the people that have a lot of influence, and those are the people that are in the industry currently.
Yeah.
And if they don't try to change anything, then nothing's going to change.
I think what's really funny to think about is the fact that if we're speaking about the industry as it stands, part of the reason why this problem still exists, even though we've been speaking about it, and by we, I mean, like, literally everyone who's a person of color or an ally in the situation has been speaking about it for over 10 years. Significantly over 10 years. But the reason it continues to persist is the fact that the entire industry, and I'm not sure a lot of people outside of the industry are aware of this, the entire industry is mostly run by old, straight, white men.
Yes, this is a fact. This was a problem with the Academy and everything that happened where people were boycotting the Oscars, you know?
No, if you look at most, I'm saying most, there are a few situations where it's not someone who's white, or maybe it's a woman running the show. But if you look at most of the big players in the industry, most of the big companies, even like agencies, management firms, like every big player is led by a president, CEO, who is a white man.
Yeah, and And while this show is not accurate, I want to be clear that this show is not accurate. I just want to mention Hollywood for a second.
Yeah.
I know you haven't seen it.
No, it's on my list.
I watched it. It made me cry.
Made you cry?
I really did like
That's
it.
sad.
Let
me check the time.
Yeah. I mean, you'll get why when you watch it. But I just wanted to bring up the fact that, like, even in that, you see these rich people, these rich businessmen. They're like, you know, why not make a studio, right? But at that time period, who were those people? But white men, right? And they controlled these. Yeah, they controlled these companies. They controlled who went in and out, what was made, all of that stuff. And I just do want to point out, women were not, regardless of whether related or not, were not involved in studios in that level at that time period. And also, there were no interracial relationships on screen at that time.
No, actually, I do know. I think it was the first interracial kiss on national television happened to be on Star Trek, just in case you're wondering. And that was, I do believe, in the 60s. So that was the first one on television. And even that, they were concerned, and they were threatening to flag it and pull the episode and all kinds of... Like, it's crazy to think about the fact that, I mean, the 1960s were only 60 years ago. And, like, that was the first interracial kiss on television. We've come a long way, but we have so much further to go, and it hasn't really been that long. So,
yeah.
Anyways.
And as we've kind of hinted at with a few of the different things that we've mentioned, is that there were a lot of regulations in place at different times.
For many, many reasons. Not just about, like, people of color or gender or anything like that.
Yeah. But a lot of these regulations affected every aspect of filmmaking. And there was something called the Hays Code put in place, otherwise known as...
The Motion Picture Production Code.
Yeah. And we do have a little bit written here just so you understand some of the rules that were in place. And these ones are specific to race, more specifically, relationships in films, things like that. But honestly, if you look it up, which Emily ended up finding this, I don't even know where she found it. Do you know?
Sometimes it's hard to find old documents like this on the internet because I'm speculating here. I want to make it clear that I'm speculating. The industry doesn't seem to ever want the public to know the dirty little secrets about being in the industry and what that meant for women, people of color, children, etc. So a lot of documentation like this has been buried or never made it to the internet because it was made in a day when it was all just physical copies and you would hand them out to your staff or to your writers, etc. So I ended up finding this, like, I went down like a rabbit hole, like looking for a copy of this that included the specific years that this stuff was in place. And I did end up finding it on some random website.
And I do believe we have the link. I do believe we have the link, which we'll link in the bio of the YouTube video, if anybody wants to check it out. But I'm just going to read off just the basic information that we have here, just so that people are a little bit more aware of why some of the things that we're dealing with in regards to this specifically are still around. So it was a set of rules and guidelines that Hollywood films were made to follow between the early 1930s and the late 60s. The production code came into being because the owners of the major Hollywood movie studios sought to stave off the threat of national government-run censorship operation. So because of the way that society was at the time, obviously, there were things that people found offensive, right? At that time period. And the government wanted to try to control a lot of what was going on, and Hollywood didn't want their movies dictated by people who weren't involved. And by creating these codes and all these guidelines that were in line with what society was like at the time, they thought they could keep the government at bay, which they were able to for a while. Of course, they made adjustments to the Hays Code, who even knows, probably 30 plus times. There are many different revisions, and I even will talk about some of the revisions, but there are so many. But yeah, let's see. So this is the preamble on the website. I don't know how, obviously, the original motion picture production code was written, but it says, motion picture producers recognize the high trust and confidence which has been placed in them by the people of the world and which have made motion pictures a universal form of entertainment. They recognize their responsibility to the public because of this trust and because entertainment and art are important influences in the life of a nation. Hence, though regarding motion pictures primarily as entertainment without any explicit purpose of teaching or propaganda, they know that the motion picture within its own field of entertainment may be directly responsible for spiritual or moral progress, for higher types of social life, and for much correct thinking. Which obviously this is something that we already know, right? That's why people put such high standards on celebrities to represent well. Do you have anything to add to that section?
I wanted to say, just a quick reminder that, like, the rating system that we have now, like the GPG, PG-13, rated R, unrated, TV-14, mature, blah, blah, blah. All of those things, that didn't exist back then.
No.
The majority of what they were making, you'd be able to walk into a theater or sit down at the television with your whole family, including your children, and that was kind of like the goal of the entire industry, was to create content that was wholesome enough, even with some adult content, it was still wholesome enough for children to watch. So,
which, honestly, I have an opinion on that, but I do want to say, before I have my opinion on that, is that these rules came into place when talkies started. Mm-hmm. Prior to this, there were silent films, and I mean, if you really think about the silent films, it's a lot of physical comedy, for the most part, or romances. I haven't personally seen a lot of the silent films that are romances, that's not my vibe, but...
It just makes me think of Singing in the Rain.
It does, yeah, oh my gosh. But, there, you know, it wasn't too crazy, and I do want to say, because, as Emily said, wholesome content, right? I don't know about anybody else, but whatever they considered wholesome back in the day, I don't particularly consider wholesome content. But I digress. Films back in the day weren't made particularly for children, even though they were made to be publicly viewed and acceptable generally.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about, I believe in a previous episode, the fact that Rebel Without a Cause was kind of the first of like a real teen film. Right?
Yeah.
And, of course, even back then, people didn't really go to the movies to sit down and watch the entire movie. The first time that happened was when Psycho came out. In which Hitchcock said, you have to be there when the movie starts. You know, so a lot of that time period, it was just you walking into a theater and seeing whatever part of a movie. And if you walk into, you know, something terribly violent or sexually explicit, it might not be the best, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so after that, they list the general principles. Number 1, no picture shall be produced which will lower the moral standards of those who see it. Hence, the sympathy of the audience shall never be thrown to the side of crime, wrongdoing, evil, or sin. By the way, at this time in the United States, religion was still heavily important in everyday life.
And may I also note that the word sin there could also potentially include things like anybody in the LGBT world and their relationships. That was considered sin at the time.
Yes.
Religion being so. Interracial marriages even. I'm thinking more like earlier 1930s, 40s, even into the 50s, obviously.
Well, there was segregation. So, yeah. I mean, just think of society and what it was like at the time, and anything that was against that was probably considered a sin.
Yeah, so, I mean, unfortunately, with this, it's not like they, like, clearly, in any of this state, like, obviously we don't want you doing this specific thing, but it was definitely alluded to due to the way that they word things and what was acceptable after.
There are some things that were specifically stated, but we will get to that.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so number 2, correct standards of life, subject only to the requirements of drama and entertainment, shall be presented. Number 3, law, natural or human, shall not be ridiculed, nor shall sympathy be created for its violation. So take that as you will.
Segregation was a thing.
Yes. And then obviously they have it sectioned off into different sections. Number 2 was sex. And it says the sanctity of this institution of marriage and the home shall be upheld. Pictures shall not infer that low forms of sex relationship are the accepted or the common thing. And then it says March 31st, 1930 to December 1956, white slavery shall not be treated. Specifically, white slavery shall not be treated. So that's interesting that it's only specific to white slavery. Didn't even know that was a thing that would have been done, but okay. And then from December 1956, it says the methods and techniques of prostitution and white slavery shall never be presented in detail, nor shall the subjects be presented unless shown in contrast to right standards of behavior. Brothels in any clear identification as such may not be shown. And the reason why I thought this was important was just the specifics on white slavery, and then also the specifics on the fact that women could still behave in these whatever ways, right? As long as it wasn't specific. You know that they were doing something that at the time was bad, but don't be specific about it. And then we have March 31st, 1930 to December 1956. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce this word, but it's miscegenation. Sex relationship between the white and black races is forbidden. And the one thing that I want to mention with this specifically is how limiting this is, because it's not specific. If you look at the actual definition, it's not black and white, but it is written that way in the Hays Code. Miscegenation is just interracial relations. And when you have films back in the day where they're taking place during segregation, in a time period where people of different races were never particularly seen as equal, and then you take away the ability for somebody to be in a relationship as a leading role, then there is no role for them. That is anything but, like in Hattie McDaniel's case, a housemaid, right? You have, they're not going to be the best friend of the white lead. You're rarely going to see a film where a leading role was anything but a white leading male, maybe besides what, Sidney Poitier. Like,
honestly, thinking prior to 1960, it's really hard to think of very many that were shown as somebody's friend and not like their driver, their housemaid.
Yeah, because and this is the problem too, right?
Milkman even.
During that time period, there were people of color who were in the industry that wanted to have those leading roles, and for white passing individuals, like people like Rita Hayworth, she could just be white, and then nobody would know.
They would change their name, they would have like hairline modifications,
I mean,
they would do all kinds of stuff for it.
Half of the celebrities from that time period don't have real names. Those names aren't real because they weren't either star material or their name was too Jewish or too Hispanic or whatever it might have you, right?
Yeah.
But then you have these black individuals, like somebody like Dorothy Dandridge, who was like, I don't want to be somebody's maid. I don't want to be somebody, I don't want to be a slave in a movie. I want to have a leading role. And then they make these rules and she's all of a sudden screwed because there's nothing for her to do.
I mean, the unfortunate thing is that she was screwed before the rules existed, because even when the rules weren't written, they were still unspoken. Like, kind of like just in society, like the rules then half the time were completely unspoken, but everybody knew.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, there were people in the industry, and there always have been people in the industry that are a lot more open to things than other people. And I mean, you could look up all types of celebrities and their debauchery during that time period if you would like. But there were people who were open, it just would never be a studio head, you know? So things got through, and there were plenty of times that these rules were broken, of course, but it was still law, and they could be probably fined, sued for it. I'm not sure.
Well, obviously, like, with it being part of the production code, because that's technically what this is. All in all, it's a production code. The film just wouldn't be released.
Yeah. And I do want to, like, give them certain benefits. There were things in this that did benefit different minority groups. Like, but also still catered, obviously, more towards one side.
One specific thing is one of the next things on our list, which didn't start until December of 1956. It wasn't added to the code until December of 1956. That no picture shall be produced that tends to incite bigotry or hatred amongst people of different races, religions, or national origins. And they go on to say they may not use offensive words, and it's a bunch of words that are
extremely offensive.
Extremely offensive and aimed specifically at people of color.
Yeah, I mean,
there's one for just about every race on that list, actually.
I mean, it even covers at the time, obviously, within this, Italian people and, you know,
Asian people.
It covers a lot of people that nowadays even would be included in the white. And I do want to say that this is section 10 under national feelings. And right above, before this, it says, the history, institutions, prominent people, and citizenry of all nations shall be represented fairly. And I just want that part to be noted. Doesn't align with half of the other things that we just read you.
It doesn't at all. It's so confusing, because that literally would state that...
Yeah, just as long as you don't say offensive words, it's fine. And I think that's awesome that they were willing to exclude derogatory terms, but when you have all these other things that are not giving people fair treatment, how does that cancellation fix the other, you know?
It really doesn't. It's honestly, sometimes when you look at codes like this, specifically this one, they're completely hypocritical of themselves. They'll say one thing and then turn around and say the direct opposite, like 3 sections later. Yeah. And so you're like, well, does that mean... And they're like, no, like, we're going to put it in there, but, like, you still have to follow the unspoken rules. Like...
Yeah. And this... Okay, so then they have a section that's... They give reasons as to why these rules are what they are. And, of course, under section 2, like we've been talking about, which is sex, they say, out of regard for the sanctity of marriage in the home... The triangle, that is the love of a third party for one already married, needs careful handling. The treatment should not throw sympathy against marriage as an institution. And this always falls under that femme fatale, right? Character. That's like enticing, but she's always wrong, and you know she's wrong, but the guy gets tempted by her, even though he's a saint. And she's the problem, you know? That's how they would play out that, right? And then you have scenes of passion must be treated with an honest acknowledgement of human nature and its normal reactions. Many scenes cannot be presented without arousing dangerous emotions on the part of the immature, the young, and the criminal classes. Which, honestly, everything within that just doesn't equate. And specifically the way that this sounds is that they're talking about unaliving people. Right?
Yeah.
Just the people that they're...
I love that.
People...
That fun little word around censorship. Unaliving people.
Yeah. People on TikTok use unaliving all the time.
Yeah.
And it works well, gotta say. Okay, and then it says, even within the limits of pure love, certain facts have been universally regarded by lawmakers as outside of the limits of safe presentation. In the case of impure love, the love which society has always regarded as wrong and which has been banned by divine law, the following are important.
That's God, by the way. Divine means God, in case you didn't catch that. Double.
Yeah. 1. Impure love must not be presented as attractive and beautiful. 2. It must not be the subject of comedy or farce or treated as material for laughter. 3. It must not be presented in such a way as to arouse passion or morbid curiosity on the part of the audience. 4. It must be made to seem right and permissible. 5. In general, it must not be detailed in method and manner. You have anything to add to
that? The unfortunate, and I feel like I've used the word unfortunate like 8 times. We should put a counter on the screen, I swear to God. But How unfortunate it is that the people making this code honestly thought they were in the right and they were doing the right thing by society.
I think for certain rules they were, but then there were some that truly weren't, you know?
But even the people who were doing it with racial...
Not even just the racial aspect of it. When it specifically states, you know, attractive or beautiful. But what does that mean to you? You get me? When you say certain things like that, in the context of permissible laws by state and divine.
No, I know.
In the way that, you know, it's just... Because of the time period that these things were written, you know what they thought was ugly and impure to do, right?
Yeah, but the unfortunate thing is, even if they were being racist in their intentions were still in their head. They thought, this is what's best for my family, for society, for the people watching. Like, that's the unfortunate thing. Even the people who were doing things that were so terrible and making these laws that were so unfair and so just hurtful and just terrible, still thought they were doing the right thing, which really bothers me.
Yeah, and maybe this is just me, but also in the way that I read it, and it's maybe just because I know the way society was at the time, and the way that a lot of religion has been used in society. It also basically says no gay people. You know? Yeah. And I find that problematic, seeing as how some of the biggest stars at the time were gay. You know?
They just didn't tell anybody. It was just a big secret because they couldn't.
Well, there was one who made it very clear he slept with whoever he felt. But, I mean, besides him.
Okay, let's move on, because I'm just going to cry if I have to think about this anymore. So, we had said we wanted to talk about some of our favorite movies and TV shows, which we've already mentioned a few, that have done really well with inclusion, and those who have not, or they've attempted and it's been not a great attempt. Did you want to list them first?
Whether it was an attempt or a fail, yes.
Yeah.
We'll go back and forth.
Okay,
right?
That's fair.
So, one that did well, which I mentioned previously, is Euphoria. And here's the thing about Euphoria, which a lot of people are also talking about, is why is there this constant, like, kids on drugs scenario happening?
Because that's what happens in the real world. I'm sorry.
Which is true, but I think
not maybe that intense, but still.
I think people are like, why can't we make a new show that's like a Disney show or something, you know, that's like for older audiences type vibe, you know.
Yeah.
Which I understand, but when you think about Euphoria, right, you have a decent amount of diversity. Do I think that they could have done better in certain circumstances? Yes. Mm-hmm. I don't love the fact that, like, you know, you have seemingly, right, these slightly stereotyped characters, even though it's not terribly bad. Like, her white best friend, her old best friend, her family is very white in a stereotypical way. Mm-hmm. In my opinion. I don't know how you feel about that.
No, I think they are too.
But, yeah. And then you have... I don't find Zendaya's family terribly... Who's Rue? I don't find her family stereotypical terribly. But, you know, you have a good amount of representation, and I really appreciated it. Mm-hmm. And I hope it continues that way. I'd like to even see if they ever add more.
Okay, so as far as did well, I really struggled to find very many things that I thought did well. I think it's easier to point out the ones that didn't do well because it's blatantly obvious.
Oh, for sure.
That they did not do well. You know, I also don't watch a lot of TV, so I
mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be TV.
I know.
I personally watch a lot of TV, so I could go TV shows all day.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah. When I was thinking about it, I also agreed with Euphoria. That was a big one. I thought that they did a pretty decent job with that. Thinking about Disney, they were on the right track with that Descendants series that I do like. I enjoy watching that. They were on the right track with that one. I don't know if you agree with that.
I do to a certain extent, but I'll tell you why I don't at the same time. But continue.
I'm trying to think. Yeah, no, like, I feel like the majority of the things that I watch don't do a great job. I watch a lot of, like, cliche stuff, though. Like, I'll tell you one that I thought did a terrible job. It's one of my favorite shows. Oh, no, back up. No, I can think of one that does. It does a really good job. Doctor Who actually does a really good job. More recently. Obviously, like, the previous decades that aren't current were not
30 seasons.
Good. Remember? Different time. But the more recent seasons, they've done a much better job. Even including The Last Doctor was a woman. Just saying. First time in TV history, The Last Doctor was, in fact, a woman. She's a white woman, but a woman nonetheless. So
I do want to comment on the Descendants thing. They don't have just white people. I will give you that. But
it's
at
not
the same
great,
time,
but they're in the right direction.
Yes, you have and I could be wrong. But like, okay. The Aladdin storyline, right, takes place in the Arabian Peninsula, which also I have like some issues with the fact that all the people of color films are just like broad spectrum things, right?
Always.
You've got Moana, which is just any, Pacific Island related, all combined, right? And same thing with the Arabian Peninsula, and then them drawing things that look like they're from every single place and every single culture in the clothes and the style of the buildings. But I digress. You cast Maz Jobrani as Jafar, right? He's Persian, okay? And then you cast his son is played by Boo Boo, who is native Korean and white, I believe.
I think.
So, a little, and then I think Cruella de Vil being black, cool. We've got Cameron Boyce, who I love with all my heart and soul, half black, half white. I miss him dearly, and I don't really know the woman who plays the evil queen. I'm not sure what she was
also in Hocus Pocus.
Yes.
She looks Italian to me. I could be wrong. She looks Italian.
I think she might be, and Sophia Carson obviously isn't.
Well, yeah.
I don't think she is.
My point is they did a better job than Disney 15 years ago would have done with it. So,
well, at least they put people in, but they just put the wrong people in
the problem is that what they did is representation for the sake of representation. Wasn't the best choice, but they did go somewhere, which is an attempt.
Though I do have to say, I love the cast of Descendants, and I wouldn't change it, even though it was cast incorrectly.
It just kind of reminds me of, like, the Cinderella with Brandy. Like, they were all over the place with casting, but, like, I enjoyed it, so.
The princess family, oh my gosh.
A black mom, an Asian kid. Like,
you got a black mom, an Asian kid. Oh my god, I live for that Cinderella,
Let me tell you one that I thought did not do well at all. Okay. It's one of my favorite TV shows of all times, but Gilmore Girls did a terrible job with. Period. I can't even say with. Like, almost every single person in the entire show, all, like, 6 seasons, plus the new revival season, everyone except for her friend Kim, Lane Kim, is white.
Okay.
And it's her and her mom.
Yeah. I'd only seen one episode.
I'm sorry, no.
I was like, I feel like there's only one Asian person.
There's an Asian girl who's Rory's best friend, her mom. Technically, her dad exists. We talk about him, we never see him. And then the guy who works at the bed and breakfast with her mother, his name is Michel. He's supposed to be French, and he is black.
Oh, yeah.
He's supposed to be like a Canadian. He's Canadian French, and he's black. I remember that. But other than that, I can't really think of a whole lot of people that weren't straight white people. In fact, they didn't even do. There wasn't any representation as far as like LGBT. There was no representation of people of color. It was not great.
And I know this is awful to say, but I'm not surprised.
And it was really cliched. But what they did use, it was cliched. I think technically Michel might have I think he played very flamboyant. I don't know that I think in the revival season his sexuality was talked about finally. But during the actual run of the show, it was never discussed, the fact that he acted very flamboyant and almost gay. Like, specifically, like...
Yeah, and...
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I just want to point out why I thought, like, I'm not surprised by this, is that, like, I mean, you have things like Glee coming out in 2010, I believe, and people are like, "There's gay characters. There's so many gay characters. Wow, there's black people," and like it actually being like a thing where people are like, "What the," you know, and so, and that was in 2010. So when there are things that come out before that, and there aren't, it's a shame that I feel this way, but I'm never surprised that there isn't inclusivity, and that's a problem.
Okay, so tell me one that you didn't think did a good job. I think most of yours are from the same network, even.
They're all from the same network.
This network has a tendency of not doing a great job. Sorry.
I just want to say this. I love CW shows. I do.
I think everybody does. They're enjoyable to watch.
Fans of CW shows talk about these issues often, and just so many problems, and I will address each problem with each show that I say, but I want to start off with Supernatural, which is one of my favorite shows of all time. But there's a lot of problems with it, you know? There was a lot of talk of queer baiting for 10 seasons of show between two of the characters.
The show's over, and it's still discussed. It's still discussed, and the show's over. Like...
Yeah, well, and then you have this incident. If you have not watched all of Supernatural, I'm not going to spoil it. But you have an incident where a character reveals their love for another character, and then they die. That they're immediately killed, right? And then they translate the episodes into other languages. And the response that the character gets back in the other languages is "I love you too," and things such of that. But in English, it's "Don't do this." Interesting. Why would you do that? Again, that's queer baiting all the way. And they've made this character from the beginning in season 1 where constantly that like machismo personality whatever type, everywhere they go they're like, oh, he's gay. It's constantly a joke made in the show, but they never say anything. Now, saying that, I don't think that character would ever say anything, but that's still problematic. And then they also talk about every character of color, which off the top of my head I think is only a few black people. I don't think there's anybody else besides black people.
I can't think of any off the top of my head in that show that are lead, that are not white.
And they all die, or they're villains.
Yeah, I don't like that trope.
So, I have a problem with that, because it makes you see the black people and you're like, I hate you because you're an asshole. You can't enjoy any of the characters. There's one enjoyable one, and he's still a dick, but he dies, you know, in the first maybe 5-6 seasons. And I just think that's unfortunate, you know. And if you want to hear any of the issues that people have with Supernatural, you could find it everywhere. Truly.
You know what movie I actually really enjoyed, and I thought they did a decent job with casting. One of the leads is black. It's called Candy Jar on Netflix. Okay, well, I actually really liked that. But it wasn't about their race. That's one of the things I loved about it. Like, he was obviously black. His character, like, it was obviously not written for a white guy. But it wasn't about the fact that he was black.
Is that the one where they're, like, doing, like, presidential campaigning or something?
That's Candy Jar. I don't remember if they're doing president. I know that it's, like, this guy and this girl, and they're, like, against each other, and they both want a recommendation. They're both, like, the smartest kids in their class, and they hate each other.
Okay. I thought they were campaigning for, like, to be, like, the
class president, like, or something. School, I think they might have been. It's been a while, but I remember thinking that they did a really good job on that one. Honestly, like, Netflix, when they attempt, a lot of the Netflix movies are pretty good. There's a few that are not. There's a few that, like, in fact, I can name a lot that are just a bunch of white people.
Oh, for sure.
Some of them are really good.
Some movie, you know, I don't think it's a problem that some movies have just white people or just black people.
Except for just, when you know, okay, Asian there is people. One movie I'm going to mention one that I hate. I am, and then my list is done because I didn't care to think about it because it made me angry. But The Kissing Booth. Where's the representation? There's
that one friend. There's that one friend that Jacob Elordi's character has, and she exists barely.
Everyone is white.
Oh no! And then there's
Dumplin'.
There's that one guy.
No one.
There's that one guy. I don't know what his name is, but I do have to say this about Netflix though, is that they're doing, there's this interesting thing that I've noticed where there will be black characters, right? Where they're presented as black characters, which I understand. And don't get me wrong, these people are still black, but they'll cast Afro-Latino actors and have them play essentially just black. And, like, there's nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, they're Afro-Latinos. Why don't you represent that? They can be black and still be Hispanic. And I've one of the movies I watched just recently, I don't remember the name of it, but it's about a girl who, they create this book where they're, like, rebelling against a whole bunch of stuff in the school. The girl in that, she represents as that, but I've seen so many where every time I look it up, I'm like, wow, they're Afro-Latino? Would have never known because it wasn't presented that way. And which it doesn't have to be, but why not? If you have them, why not use that? Anyways, next section.
So we talk about Marvel a lot. We've talked about it, like, on, I think, every single episode so far, and this is number 3.
In some shape or form, yes.
Yeah, so what we wanted to talk about, and one of the things that, like, led us to this conversation today was the fact that, there's a new Marvel movie, and nobody's hearing about it. Not one person is hearing about it, because they had a huge premiere, but did not publicize it. They didn't really invite anybody. There's been, like, no PR online, really, down to the actor doing his own PR work, which is horrifying.
Was basically him trolling the internet on Twitter, which I live for.
Okay, so we have some quotes that we probably should tell them what the movie is first. I'm ahead of myself.
The movie is Shang Chi.
Yes.
It comes out on September 3rd. When this episode comes out, it would have been out for probably 2 to 3 weeks. If you haven't seen it, go see it. Support, please. Okay, continue.
And it's super exciting because this is one of the first movies outside of, like, Crazy Rich Asians led by an Asian cast. Like, it's pretty impressive. See, but the controversy here is the fact that the studio is referring to it as an experiment. I'm using air quotes here. Experiment. So the quote reads, on Shang-Chi, we think it's actually going to be an interesting experiment.
Say Shang-Chi.
Shang-Chi? Shang-Chi. My apologies. That white girl comes out hard sometimes. I'm so sorry. Okay, so Shang-Chi. So on Shang-Chi, we think it's actually going to be an interesting experiment for us because it's got only a 45-day window for us. So the prospect of being able to take a Marvel title to the streaming service after going theatrical at 45 days will be yet another data point to inform our actions going forward on our titles. So I understand that they're talking about specifically, we're going to do the release from theatrical to streaming differently than we had before. And that's what they're referring to. But the fact that they've chosen to refer to it as an experiment, and that they've chosen to try something new on an Asian-led film when that's already, like, it's already a big deal on its own.
If this doesn't do well, then the representation isn't going to stay, and that's a problem.
Yeah.
And the thing that I had a problem with all of this is I understand that Black Widow came out, like, 2 months ago, but people were able to go to the theaters. So you're going to do against your contract with Scarlett for Black Widow and put it straight to streaming.
Yeah.
But then you're going to not put Shang-Chi on streaming to experiment with how it does.
Yeah. So they've just made some crappy decisions as far as, like, how it's going to affect two films that are honestly, they're films that aren't your typical Marvel movie, unfortunately. They're the films that are led by an Asian lead. They're led by a woman. So they're going to do the experimenting on the films that they're already expecting to make less money on. They're assuming because of who's leading the film. So anyways, the actor, can you give me his name, please? We only have his last name.
His name is Simu Liu.
One more time.
Simu Liu. Simu Liu.
Thank you. Simu Liu. Sometimes I need to, like, little bits at a time. I try, I promise. So he seemed to respond to the comment on that Saturday morning after it was released when he posted to social media saying that Shang Chi, which is Marvel's first Asian superhero film, is not an experiment. He goes on to say, "We are the underdog, the underestimated. We are the ceiling breakers. We are the celebration of culture and joy that will persevere after an embattled year. We are the surprise. I'm fired the up to make history on September 3rd. Join us." And that, we're assuming, we know, right, that he's responding to the fact that it was publicly stated that this movie is going to be an experiment to Marvel. And he has a point. Don't call us an experiment. Don't even refer, even if you're saying you're changing the way you're doing the streaming options, don't refer to them as an experiment. They are not an experiment. They are making moves. Like, I don't want to hear that either.
Yeah, and I do want to say this. Obviously, everybody knew that Shang-Chi was coming because Marvel announces its lineup of movies
way ahead of time, like years in advance.
Yeah, in whichever phases that they're working on. But then we heard nothing about it. If honestly, if it weren't for TikTok and Twitter, I would not have known that this film was coming out anytime soon.
Yeah, me neither.
I would have had no clue. And the problem too is that, like we mentioned Black Panther way earlier, there are people who are having this debate of like, well, why does it feel like people aren't supporting the way that they were supporting Black Panther and all this? And I'm like, why are you pinning the only two racially led Marvel movies against each other, for one? Two, why are people out here saying, well, it doesn't even look good? But you've seen a teaser trailer and not even a proper trailer of the film.
Yeah, Disney,
how do you know
Marvel hasn't even attempted to do the same type of publicity that it usually does. For some of their films, they spend somewhere between half and the entire budget on just their publicities. So their trailers, their posters, their teasers, their ad spots on TV, on your Hulu, on your ad breaks. They take like the budget of the film and they like have it and they go, we're going to spend that much, or they take even sometimes the whole thing, depending on how important it is, to do international advertising. And it's like very apparent they've done none of it. Like, none of it.
Yeah, I have been watching live television for the past few weeks, watching, Love Island.
Yeah.
And I kid you not, until about Wednesday, I had not seen, during any commercial, a Shang-Chi trailer.
Yeah.
I have to admit, honestly, the trailer that they showed wasn't even a full proper trailer. All it was all the people that came before you, and it's like Thor and Captain America and Iron Man, and now you, and that's all. That's all I saw. I had to look it up myself to see something actually like relevant to what happens in Shang-Chi.
Yeah. So when we finally did get some information about the red carpet that did happen, Simu, did I say it right that time? Did he do it?
Yes.
Okay. So he was obviously on camera being interviewed on the red carpet for his film, and he said, "I hope that it's not the last, because we've been celebrating a lot of firsts in our community. When Crazy Rich Asians came out, 3 years ago, we celebrated as the first studio movie with a predominantly Asian cast in almost 25 years. And, I'm looking forward to the moment where we no longer are celebrating firsts. We're celebrating seconds and thirds and fourths and fifths and all of that. So I'll take this moment for what it is. Such an incredible honor."
Yeah.
This man is ridiculously well spoken. Like, can you imagine being cast in a Marvel movie and then going, we're not going to do any of the work? And, like, he's still, like, he has grace about it still. That's amazing.
And he's working his ass off to make sure that this isn't just successful for him, that it's successful for an entire community.
Yeah.
That's insane to me. But during the course of watching him work his ass off for this movie, he's one of my new favorite people.
Yeah.
Like,
I've added it to my list of people that I'm going to continue watching. Like, I remember earlier I was talking about how, like, I now have a mini obsession with John Boyega. This man's up there too. He's cool. He's just cool.
Yeah. And I do want to also just point out, like, I've seen, I couldn't even tell you how many TikTok creators talking about Shang-Chi.
So many.
And I've seen a lot of them talk about two things. One, clapping back at people who are I feel weird when I say stuff like that because that's not how I talk, but it's the correct terminology.
It is.
Anyways, clapping back at people who are saying that it's going to be boring because it's an Asian movie, or saying that Simu isn't known well enough, or or people saying, and I can't tell you, I don't know anything about this situation. I truly don't, so I can't speak on it. It's people saying, well, I'm not going to see it because Awkwafina did offensive things. I can't speak to that, but then you have people, like, I think there's to a certain point where you have to realize that one person's up is then going to ruin something for an entire community.
Yeah.
And not only that, ruin something for people who work hard for their job. And you have to realize that not everything is about that one singular person in a project with hundreds of people in it.
I gotta say, I think it's so funny that people are so concerned about him not being well enough known. Because tell me that half of the actors playing superheroes in Marvel were that well known before they became a Marvel actor. Not that they didn't have good roles and they weren't known, but they weren't that well known either.
You have a lot of people who are not known for anything like that, who were pushed into superstardom because of Marvel.
Yeah, 110%. Like, my first thought, of course, is Sebastian Stan. Like, he had done Gossip Girl, he'd done a bunch of stuff, but that movie pushed his name into the limelight.
And he literally said, I saw, of course, on TikTok, Marvel TikTok is everywhere. He literally said that people didn't even know who he was, like, the first few years that he was playing Bucky still.
Yeah, that's crazy. So for them to say that Simu was not well enough known to play this part is absolute bullshit. I'm sorry. Period. Yeah. Marvel makes people famous. It's not the other way around. Marvel is well enough known. They don't need an A-lister to make a movie work. Period. So
no, they don't. Marvel fans are going to watch Marvel movies unless they're racist or sexist.
Yeah.
Besides the point. I do want to talk about this one specific TikTok creator who is really well known for Marvel. He also talks about a lot of different films. And is an executive producer of a new animated series. I don't really know much about it, but he did say that the other day when I was on TikTok. Who are we talking about? We're talking about Straw Hat Goofy. Underscores in between each word.
Yes.
He says he mentioned the whole experimenting with Shang Chi thing, and he says this is exactly the tone deaf thing I've been talking about when it comes to representation in movies. Here you have the first Asian-led MCU film. This is no riddle that this is history in the making. If you're going to be putting a film of this magnitude in theaters, you need to do everything in your power to make sure this is a part of history people can be proud of. And unfortunately, up until now, that hasn't really been the case. I mean, the premiere went and passed and nobody knew what was happening except for the people that were invited to the premiere. Which is insane. And then the last one is from a TikTok creator, Geek with Johnny. Johnny spelled Jonny. He says, seeing creators like, and he mentioned Straw Hat Goofy and a few other ones, going to see the Shang-Chi premiere last night and having overwhelming positive reactions makes me feel validated, heard, seen. This is the first Marvel movie where we have an Asian-led role, and if we were to show this movie to a young me, Iron Man wouldn't have been my favorite superhero. It would have been Shang-Chi all the way, 100%. And for those who are saying representation doesn't matter, who cares about representation? It matters to a goddamn lot of people out there. And coming from a teacher who teaches a lot of kids who are mixed race, it's important.
Yeah. I think the main note here is that the world needs to be more careful about how we view representation and where it starts, and that we just have respect for each other. Because if, like I said earlier, like if we just had respect for other races, if we just could see that their lives are just as valid as our own, then none of this would be happening. None of it. So just have some respect. Even if you don't like it, don't go watch it. You have an issue with it, don't bring it up. Just let them have their moment, because everybody deserves to have a moment.
Yeah. Superheroes have another level of importance in society above that of even just the film and the actors in it. You know? superheroes have been around for decades and are extremely important to a lot of people because it's, especially with Marvel, has always been representation within their characters, right? And Stan Lee made that a choice to always have inclusivity to at least a certain extent within the comics that he created. And for people to decide whether you have read the comics or not, to be upset that now they're choosing to include other characters and other races and other storylines beyond that of the original Captain America, or Black Widow getting her own moment, or Captain Marvel being out of the comics, doing Guardians of the Galaxy, whatever it might have you. It's kind of a shame that people can't be happy that something that they say they love so much is expanding into the bigger world that it was originally created in. But that's just me.
Well, that's all we got. That's the episode.
Yes. And how about for this week? If there's anything that you have an opinion on in regards to future diversity in the entertainment industry, let us know. Rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and anywhere you can stream your podcast. Like this video on YouTube. Any information that we had that we can link below, we will. And please share this video. Spread the word. We are fun, we promise.
Oh my god. You shouldn't have to promise people you're fun, Mom.
I'm not fun. If you want to hang out with me, I'm probably going to tell you I want to watch the TV show. But
that's valid. She does.
I think that's fun.
It can be.
Yeah. So, anyways, thank you for listening to this podcast. Next week will be significantly shorter because after episode 4, we're getting into Halloween time. Spooky season, as the internet says.
Oh my god. Okay.
Thank you for listening to our pod. Bye.
Bye.